Once there was a king who built a magnificent church. It took the architects 7 years to complete the structure. On the day of its dedication, the king went to pray in the new church, but to his surprise he found himself enveloped in a thick, suffocating fog. Suddenly, a monk appeared before him and said, "Long live the king! You've built a fine church, but it's missing one crucial thing." Before the king could respond, the monk vanished. Frustrated, the king ordered his men to demolish the building and construct an even grander one. This process took another 7 years. When the king returned to dedicate the second church, he encountered the same dense fog and the mysterious monk, who repeated his cryptic message, "Long live the king! You've built a beautiful church, but it still lacks one essential element." Once again, the monk disappeared before the king could question him. Determined to get it right, the king had the second church torn down and a third one built, more splendid than anything the world had ever seen. It took 7 more years to complete. On the day of the third dedication, the king found himself in the now familiar fog, face to face with the enigmatic monk. "Long live the king," the monk declared. "You've built an incomparably beautiful church, but it's still missing one vital thing." This time, as the monk turned to leave, the king grabbed him by the collar. "Tell me," he demanded, "what's the one thing my church is lacking? This is the 3rd time you've made me rebuild, wasting years of labor and resources." The monk replied simply, "The fairy nightingale is the only thing your magnificent church needs," and then vanished into the fog. The king returned to his palace, consumed by sadness. His 3 sons, noticing their father's distress, approached him. "Long live the king!" they said. "Father, what's troubling you?" The king sighed heavily. "My sons, I'm getting old, and our new church needs the fairy nightingale, but I have no idea how to obtain it." His sons immediately volunteered, "Don't worry, father. We'll go and bring it back for you." And so the 3 princes set out on their quest. After a long journey, they came to a crossroads where the path split into 3. Each road had a sign. The broad road's sign read, "He who takes this road returns safely." The middle road's sign warned, "He who takes this road may or may not return." The narrow road sign ominously stated, "He who takes this road never returns." The oldest brother chose the broad road, saying, "I'll take the safe path." The second brother picked the middle road, reasoning, "I'll take my chances." The youngest brother, without hesitation, took the narrow road despite its dire warning. The oldest prince soon arrived at a bustling city. Looking around, he thought to himself, "Why should I risk my life going further? I'd be better off staying here." And with that, he found work as a servant in one of the city's inns. The second brother's journey led him to the other side of a mountain, where he found a lush green meadow dotted with shady trees and inviting benches. Tired from his travels, he sat down to rest. Suddenly, a giant as black as night appeared, wielding an iron rod. With one swift stroke, the giant turned the prince into a round stone, which rolled under the bench. Meanwhile, the youngest prince bravely ventured down the road from which there was supposedly no return. As he walked, a dense fog enveloped him, and suddenly the mysterious monk who had spoken to his father appeared before him. "God speed you, son," the monk said. "Where are you headed?" The young prince replied confidently, "I'm going to bring back the fairy nightingale for our new church." "Good," nodded the monk, "but this path is treacherous. Let me give you some advice." The monk then explained that the fairy nightingale belonged to the beautiful fairy queen and outlined the challenges the prince would face. "First, you'll come to a river that the fairy queen has turned into poison. You must drink from it and say, 'Oh, how wonderful. This is the water of immortality.' Next, you'll find a grove she's transformed into a tangle of thorns and thistles. Smell the plants and say, 'Oh, how lovely. This grove is the flower of paradise.' Then you'll reach a narrow pass. On one side, there's a chained wolf with grass in front of it. On the other, a chained lamb with meat before it. Switch their food. Finally, you'll come to a large gate with 2 doors, one open, one closed. Close the open door and open the closed one. Inside, you'll find the sleeping fairy queen. She sleeps for 7 days and nights, then stays awake for 7 days and nights. If you can do all this and reach her while she's asleep, you can take the nightingale. If not, you're doomed. Armed with this knowledge, the young prince set out. He came to the poisoned river and, steeling himself, took a drink. "Oh, how wonderful!" he exclaimed. "This is the water of immortality." Next, he reached the thorny grove. Despite the painful pricks, he inhaled deeply and said, "Oh, how lovely! This grove is the flower of paradise." At the narrow pass, he carefully switched the wolf's grass with the lamb's meat. Finally, he arrived at the large gate. True to the monk's instructions, he closed the open door and opened the closed one. Entering quietly, the prince found himself in an exquisite bedchamber. There, on a purple bed adorned with gold and jewels, lay a maiden as beautiful as the sun, fast asleep. The fairy nightingale perched on her bedside, singing 1,000 enchanting melodies, lulling the queen into a deep slumber. The prince, hidden behind a tapestry, watched as the nightingale returned to its cage. Seizing his chance, he crept forward, gently took the cage, and, unable to resist, pressed a soft kiss on the sleeping queen's forehead. Then, with his prize in hand, he began his journey back. When the fairy queen awoke and discovered the theft, she cried out, "Doors, catch the thief!" But the doors replied, "God speed him! He closed the open one of us and opened the closed one." "Wolf and lamb, catch the thief!" the queen commanded. "God speed him!" they answered. "He gave meat to the wolf and grass to the lamb." Frustrated, the fairy queen called out, "Grove, catch the thief!" But the grove responded, "God speed him! You made me thorns and thistles. He called me a flower of paradise." In desperation, the queen cried, "River, catch the thief!" The river replied, "God speed him! You made me a stream of poison. He called me the water of immortality." Realizing her enchantments had failed, the fairy queen mounted her horse and set off in pursuit of the young prince. Meanwhile, the prince had safely passed all the dangerous places and returned to the crossroads where the three paths met. To his surprise, he found the monk waiting for him. "Here's the fairy nightingale, Holy Father," the prince said, handing over the cage. Noticing his brothers hadn't returned, he decided to search for them. First, he took the broad road, eventually reaching the inn where his eldest brother worked. He revealed his identity and convinced his brother to return with him to the monk. Next, he ventured down the middle road, coming to the green meadow. As he sat on a bench, the giant appeared, brandishing his iron rod. But the prince, quick and clever, dodged the blow and snatched the rod from the giant's hand. With one strike, he turned the giant into a huge round black stone. Suspecting his second brother's fate, the prince began striking various stones scattered across the meadow. Each one transformed back into a person, but none was his brother. Finally, he noticed a stone under the bench. When he struck it, it changed into his brother, who immediately tried to run away. "Brother, brother, don't run! It's me!" the prince called out. Reunited at last, the three brothers returned to the monk. Together, they set off towards their father's city with the fairy nightingale. On the way, they grew thirsty and came upon a well. The two older brothers lowered their youngest sibling into the well to fetch water. As soon as he reached the bottom, they exchanged a sinister glance. "When we return home," one said, "all the praise and glory will go to him for bringing the nightingale. We'll be overshadowed." "You're right," the other agreed. "We can't let that happen." Without hesitation, they cut the rope, abandoning their brother in the well. Taking the nightingale, they hurried back to their father's palace. "Father," they announced, "our youngest brother died in our quest to obtain the fairy nightingale, but we too succeeded in bringing it." They hung the cage in the new church, but to everyone's dismay, the fairy nightingale remained silent and dejected, refusing to sing a single note. Not long after, the fairy queen arrived at the king's court. "Who is the hero that brought my nightingale?" she demanded. "We did," the two brothers claimed. The queen's eyes narrowed. "Well then, what did you encounter on your journey?" "Nothing of note," they replied nervously. Then it wasn't you who brought it, the Queen declared. You're thieves. She ordered their immediate arrest, proclaiming, "You shall remain imprisoned until the true hero who brought the fairy Nightingale is presented to me." Meanwhile, the fate of the youngest prince took an unexpected turn. Some women gleaning barley in the fields happened to pass by the well where he had been left. Hearing his groans, they rescued him from the well. One of the women, who had no children of her own, decided to adopt him as her son. A few weeks passed, and news reached their village about the king's sons, bringing the fairy Nightingale and the subsequent arrival of the fairy queen, demanding its return. The young prince, now living as a peasant boy, asked his adoptive mother, "A new church has been built in the city. May I go and see it?" The old woman agreed, and he set off for the city, disguised as a simple country lad. Upon reaching his father's house, he learned of his brother's imprisonment. Without hesitation, he went to the prison and set them free. The fairy queen, hearing of this development, confronted the young man. "I am the fairy queen, owner of the Nightingale," she declared. "Are you not afraid of me?" The prince stood tall and replied, "I am the one who brought the fairy Nightingale. I have no reason to fear you." "What did you see on your journey?" the queen asked, her eyes narrowing. The prince recounted everything he had encountered and done during his quest. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "And what's more, I left a mark upon your forehead with my own lips. Look at your reflection in that pond, and you'll see that you're my betrothed." The fairy queen, intrigued, peered at her reflection in the nearby pond. Sure enough, she saw the mark of the prince's kiss upon her forehead. Her expression softened, and she turned to the young man with newfound admiration. "Hero," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "you are indeed worthy of me. From this moment on, I am yours." The news spread quickly throughout the kingdom. The king, overjoyed at the return of his youngest son and the truth of his heroic deeds, ordered a grand celebration. A magnificent wedding festival was held, lasting for 40 days and 40 nights. The entire kingdom rejoiced in the union of the brave prince and the beautiful fairy queen. When the festivities concluded, the couple went to the church to be married. As they entered, a miraculous thing happened. The fairy Nightingale, silent for so long, burst into song. Its sweet melodies filled the air, enchanting all who heard it. The birds sang 1,001 songs, each more beautiful than the last. From that day forward, the fairy Nightingale continued to sing in the church, its voice a constant reminder of the prince's bravery and the power of true love. The kingdom prospered under the rule of the young prince and his fairy bride, and the church, now complete with its magical songbird, became renowned throughout the land. As for the fairy Nightingale, it is said that it sings to this very day, its melodies a source of wonder and joy for all the world to hear.